this computer. Okay, so we're recording, and this is the end of our series. Oh wait, are we talking about both? Are we talking about both? Did we?
I don't know. I don't know.
That was my clarification. Like, just the what about?
Yeah.
I got them both on deck.
Okay, well, it seems like we all have them both on deck, so we should definitely talk about both. It's gonna be tight, but I'll set a timer for like 25 minutes, and then we can switch.
Okay.
Or I'll set a timer for 25 minutes, and then we can just see where we are. Maybe we'll talk about both together, but
Yeah. I don't. They kind of bleed together in my mind.
good point. Oh my gosh, now I feel like it's been so long since I read Home.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we should do quick intros. I feel like we do that every time. My name is Lawrence. I live in Boston, Massachusetts. And fun fact about me, I love my godson. He's 11 months old and can almost say ball.
Oh.
Bernadette, do you want to go?
Sure. I'm Bernadette Miracle. I live on the land of the Snoqualmie, which is just east of what is commonly known as Seattle in Washington State. And a fun fact about me is that I fly across the country often. Feels like seemingly just for miles, but actually to do technically to do race first training, but we do this in the wintertime, which doesn't make sense.
I'm Reed, and I live in New York City. And fun fact about me, I've been really getting into like online yoga classes over the last month, and I'm doing like every morning, and I cannot stop. It's so great.
I need that online yoga after my flight.
It's amazing. So where should we start?
Who even knows?
Should we just try to like collectively remember what happened in Home?
Yeah. And apologies for muting in and out as I wrangle these children. I am listening.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Also, clarity.
Yeah.
Just to be clear to everyone, you definitely said wrangle, not strangle. Which is the thing my parents would have said.
Perhaps I mean both. But mostly wrangle.
Oh. Okay, so Home. I'm trying to remember everything that happens. But in my mind, Home, like we start out on UMSA University. Is that right?
Yep, it was a uni, for sure.
UMSA Uni. And we're just like getting a sense of what Binti's life is like there with Ahu.
Yep.
And like Binti is like doing really a great job in the university, but she's also dealing with like extreme mental health challenges, basically like anxiety and like panic attacks, and just like feeling that she needs to like go home and like kind of right the wrongs of her like transgressions of leaving. That sound right?
Yep. Yep. I definitely remember her learning, or I'm looking at her learning some new skills to like deal with her anxiety. like from one of her favorite professors. Basically, she's like learning how to use treeing and breathing, like mindfulness practices to like
Yeah.
calm herself down when things get intense. Oh, and also part of the intensity she's feeling is um her tentacles, her Medusa
Oh
tentacles.
yeah.
Which aren't called tentacles. What are they called?
Um,
Oh no, they are tentacles.
yeah. Learn to like identify or not like understand what these like genetic changes are doing to her emotions, and understandably, it's kind of terrifying. She's like, why am I angry all the time? I used to be like that.
Yeah, I think not to push us too much farther into the book,
Do
but
it.
like as she's getting prepared to go back home, and it just reminded me of being in college and like the code switching. I went to a predominantly white university and then came home to a very not white community. I grew up in El Paso, Texas, so it wasn't black, but it definitely wasn't white. And seeing like the through lines of her anxiety and like why am I so angry as I'm like getting ready to make this journey back home kind of space. And then even as she, I thought like obviously getting ready to get back on a ship that she had a very traumatic experience on,
Mm-hmm.
and being like, oh my God, how am I going to even be able to like walk through these same places? And then going all the way to the point of going back home after having left home without people really necessarily approving of her leaving home. So coming back, one, not thinking she was ever going to come back, but then also coming back from a place that's very different than where she had left, coming back to a place that may be very different than what she had left. And the reaction she
Mm-hmm.
gets from folks and who she's coming back with in particular,
Mm-hmm.
with Oku is, it made me think of the first boyfriend I had in college was a white guy. And when I came home with this white guy, people were like, what's happening? Who are you bringing home and what's happening? And just her anxiety levels of like coming back and being deemed as kind of other from a place that she feels so connected to was something that really resonated for me.
Whoa, I had not made the the link to like maybe that anger was coming from places other than just her tentacles.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's what you're saying, Brenda, maybe not. But um yeah, if she didn't have tentacles, that anger could very well still be there. And as you say that, it certainly makes me think about um my experience going to college and then coming home from college, which um for me, like I grew up in a mostly white community and went to school at a mostly white university. Um, Neither was all white, but both were majority white. So going home and coming back wasn't so stark in terms of race for me, but definitely in terms of like sexual orientation. Like I was out of the closet in Boston and I was in the closet when I came home. Um, and there was for sure feelings, anger and confusion, and just like how is it possible that these two worlds exist at the same time? Um, yeah. So, and then coming home and like on the front of being now perceived as other by home, and then all the feelings that that stirs up, like if I can leave and change and come back and be perceived as other, was I ever actually a part of this place originally? Or like, what does it mean to be a part of this place? What are the things that make people, what are the things that make people belong? Um, And I feel like Binti throughout this book and the next book deals like repetitively with belonging,
Mm-hmm.
especially as her like literal DNA keeps changing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things I was really struck by in like the journey of coming home, like how long it took for her to like be ready to take that journey, was just like the way this author approached the way she approaches like the real challenges of like stress, anxiety, and like mental health. Where like Binti, I think it was like she was about to go on the ship, where she experienced like super traumatic incidents and had like a breakdown. And I feel like most other like just like books and like popular media I've seen have portrayed instances like that. But then what happens afterwards, so like the person kind of like gets through it and like goes on the journey and like kind of struggles through it. And this book, it was like, no, actually, we're going to stop right now and we're just going to like, we're just going to actually like treat this for like a couple like weeks or however long you need, a couple months before you like keep going on this process. And I was like totally caught me off guard. I'm like, oh yeah, like that's how like people should actually know and respond to like really serious trauma and like experiences of like yeah, like transcending different identities and like different like physical places all at once.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful shift in normal. You know, like obviously science fiction can do lots of shifts in what normal is, but that was, I think, a pretty subtle one, but yeah, huge. So the next things that I'm looking through and remembering were like Binti seeing the night masquerade again and being freaked out, but also like not freaked out because that's like such a regular occurrence. It seems.
Yeah. Oh, like outside of her window.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny now thinking back to this book, having read the third book. It's like,
What that is.
what's happening when the night masquerade shows up? Um, uh, but then, I mean, obviously, for me, the most important part of this second book was like her like getting in touch with this alien DNA that she has that is like activated in this like magical rite of passage. I definitely don't know how to say this, like the Zenaria.
Yeah.
I think I've been saying Zenaria in my head. And the person who like turns it on is the Aria, with like this like prick, like feather prick to like her finger.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
A feather prick from this like magical owl or something.
Yeah, this like owl. She always says owl-like creature.
Yeah.
And she like, I mean, the author, Akora Fort, says like she goes really out of her way to make sure that you as a reader understand that it's not an owl. It's an owl-like creature that can only be processed by human or Himba eyes as an owl, but it's not an owl.
Yeah.
So I just thought the repetitiveness of that clarity is important.
Yeah, what did you make of just like her like unlocking of this like technology combined with this like huge revealing of the, like her family's history and this like incredible like othering of these like desert people
Yeah.
that like family like participated in like knowingly at least her father and her mom And that like, so she's dealing with not only having this kind of crisis of like identity and like who she is, like her core roots, but then she learns that like, oh, the roots that she thought she has are not even those roots at all. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so many layers, like personal layers and like layers in the book, but maybe two things I'll just say briefly. Um, so it feels like a pretty classic parallel to like immigration stories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, a thing that often happens when people move from one place to another by choice or by force is assimilation. And assimilation can often look like denying one's history in order to gain the benefits of the new place. And sometimes assimilation is a choice, and sometimes it's like survival. Like people will literally kill you if you don't assimilate well enough.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think about the difference between um, well, I don't know. This is not like a this. I think I'm going to skip that. That's not useful to say. Um, but I feel like the immigration narrative is pretty. I feel like that's what she's drawing on, or
Mm-hmm.
that's what it spoke to for me. Um, and the related new normal having to justify itself by calling the old or previous cultures like primitive or backwards or like stupid in some ways or just like nuts. Like, the way that Himba people looked at the desert people um, who were like doing all these crazy, like what looked like really bizarre hand motions.
Mm-hmm.
And like groups of people all doing that at the same time to them looked nuts. It's like, those are primitive people, but of course they have no idea that they're like communicating with people thousands or light years away. Like
Mm-hmm.
that feels so typical.
Mm-hmm.
And like, oh, we talk about indigenous people in like modern popular dominant narratives in the West as like being primitive.
Mm-hmm.
But like actually the more Western society advances, the more people are realizing that those ways of being are way more advanced than our ways of being. It's just what we talk about advanced meaning is totally different. Like extractive societies are actually really destructive and self-terminating, and regenerative societies that are earth-based are sustaining. Like it's possible to, anyways. So those are two things that came up, like the assimilation narrative being parallel to immigration, and then what happens when people learn more deeply about cultures that are older than theirs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I also like was like writing down this experience. I was like, oh yeah, like migration story, like immigrant story, like it's just so. She does such an incredible job of showing like what one person's experience can be like, passing through so many different cultures and like learning about it and understanding it, and then like the sheer like struggle it would be to try to explain to someone else what they're learning about. Like things that are just so hard to describe like in words. And it's something that I'm really curious about, like when we return to like when we get to the third book of like this deep culture that like ability that like she was able to draw on to like cross these like huge bounds of like history and like identity differences and like in a way that's it's almost like a mind meld to actually truly understand like people's experiences. Um, yeah, but I think Binti is constantly in this situation where she understands she understands that people so much better than her own people can understand other people, and so she's just constantly put into a situation where she like this constant like mediator, and constant kind of like middle ground, that like she never really like asked for, and we see this like all the way in the beginning where when she first met the Meduse and they like murdered all these people on the ship, and then she was like, I now need to be the ambassador for these people to this like university. So it's just like keeps happening over and over and over again. It's just obvious that like she's very like, even if she doesn't like recognize it, like she just keeps putting these positions where she has to fulfill that role, and like is somehow like consistently able to like do it, even if other people mess it up. Hey Bernadette, how are the kids?
Welcome back.
It's been a day of meetings, so my phone died. Sorry.
Oh, that wasn't even the
The kids
kid.
are still alive. They're just wrangled, not strangled.
What she does to the kids.
I'll just listen a bit to get caught up on where you guys are. No need to catch me up.
Should we talk?
Oh,
No.
yeah.
I was wondering if we should get to the end of book 2
Great.
and transition ourselves to book 3.
Perfect.
So, if I remember right, the very end of book 2, she now is activated with these new powers of Annie's and Zenaria's communication abilities. And like the way I think about it, it's like a virtual, it's like almost a form of like the internet that she can just like project in front of her and just like send messages to people like anywhere and everywhere. And she's like has activated this ancient alien like wisdom like deeply like already existing within her, and not surprisingly it's pretty overwhelming. And at the same time she learns that the Kush people have attacked the root and have attacked Akwu, and she has no idea what the result of that is. But she's like days away in the desert from her family and from her like friend. I'm not sure what she calls it. Her partner, I think, is what she calls.
Someone else calls Okwu her partner, and she's like resistant, and then she's like, okay.
Yeah, she's like, yeah, that's exactly. Like, okay. It's like, I'm so yeah, I think is that where we end on book 2, and that's exactly where I think where book 3 picks up.
Yeah, she's like learning how to send messages with Zenaria, but she can't do it yet. She's like, she struggles, and she gets like really sick when she tries to do it. She gets like nauseous, or like she talks about like a planet behind her and like the world opening up in front of her. So she's learning how to activate and use this new ability. It doesn't come like immediately, which I think matters. Okay, so now book 3.
Book 3.
Book 3 starts out with her having a nightmare, or she's like, yeah, she has a fake nightmare, or not a fake nightmare. She's trying to communicate with her family in the root that's being burned. And she has this image of them all inside, and in her mind, they're like burning to death. It's a jarring opening scene, for sure.
Right, and then she's like in the middle of the desert on the way back with Mwini, I think it's pronounced it.
Yeah.
How-
Sure.
um, and we learn like we learn like a lot in this desert journey. We learn that Mawini is also what's it called? What's that ability? The
Grounding? Or the Zenaria?
no, like the ability to like speak to animals. His ability to speak to animals is really
Oh,
super.
he's a harmonizer.
Yes, he's also a harmonizer.
Right.
And, um, and like an elephant taught him how to harmonize. This is awesome.
There's a particular section, I think, well, it's on page 34 and 35. I marked it. I don't even remember why I marked it, but when you says something, so it's at the bottom, and he says, because I'm actually a spirit. And then he says, like, haven't you learned anything from all this? What did you think I was a few days ago? What did you think of all the Inyus in Arya? You thought we were savages. You were raised to believe that, even though your father was one of us. Now I'm sitting here telling you how I learned I was a harmonizer, and you're so stuck in like the story that you thought you knew about me. You're so stuck in the story that you learned that you'd rather question me than listen to me as I tell you about all the lies that you know about me. And I think I've marked that because it just feels so resonant with like so many experiences
Yeah,
I've had, and also like experiences I feel like our country is going through at a national level as it
yeah,
relates to like the original inhabitants of this land. Um, and
yeah.
Bernadette definitely like noticed, and in other places I do, but I don't yet in Boston like acknowledge original inhabitants of land that we're on. Like all of these city names that we talk about are
Mm.
like occupied, like it's all occupied territory. And it's funny, I actually started doing that when I was in Seattle.
Hmm.
um,
It's a Seattle thing. For sure.
Seattle thing. Um, anyway, that paragraph just like so real. Like you would still rather, even though you're looking at me and talking to me, you would rather believe the lies that you know than hear what I'm saying to you, the person physically in front of you. And I know
Mm.
part of that is connected to how solid worldviews get, um, but also seeing it in written form is just like, that's so stupid. Like, why do we do that?
Hmm. Yeah, I had a very real life experience with that. I don't even know what days it is anymore. I don't get to leave my home, but last Wednesday and Thursday when I was in Chicago, and the person who was coordinating our lab was in Seattle, and she told us the night before, your Chicago lab host may cancel because it may be too icy and school will be 2 hours delayed or canceled. And she emailed us the next morning, 3 o'clock her time, mind you, 5 o'clock our time, telling us that the district had canceled because of an ice storm. And I looked out my window and I was like, there's no ice. And we were in the Uber on the way to the district. The school buses were running. We went past the school where there were drop offs happening. Like everything with my eyes was telling me, girl, you're wrong. You're in Seattle. You can't possibly know. You're in Seattle. Like you can't know what's happening on the ground. And I'm looking with my own eyes, but I was believing her it's canceled and actually making plans to go to the airport rather than go to the district office where we were supposed to have the meeting. And to your point of like, why do we do that? And why are we hardwired to like believe stories that we've been told over like our own lived experiences and our own like all of our senses telling us that that story isn't true. It's like so hard to disconnect them.
Oh, that's so real. exactly what you're saying, and this like point is what I'm dealing with also right now in work, and like things like going on. What we're doing last is like community engagement and getting like incredible stories from people across New York about their experiences in the housing market, about their experiences like segregation, discrimination, and like the huge challenge that we're having with some of the like the leadership around describing just like how things can be true. Just go and talk about people and learning their experiences, how those can be truths, even those truths don't necessarily have to be like universal or the, and some of those truths can be like in conflict with like quantitative data, but like how to like really legitimate this like people's truths. It, it's really 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 challenging to like to get that across. Um, yeah, I think thinking about I think this is such a perfect quote. I'm so glad you found this. Like at the heart of like everything in this book too. Like at all the challenges, like all these groups of people just like cannot talk to each other really. Like just can't really communicate with each other.
And I think there's a story of them walking past, like in on page 74 and 75, walking past undying trees, and they're talking about like, what do you call them, undying trees, and do they have spirits in them, and everything having spirit in it, and how you're able to communicate across. I don't even know what the word I'm looking for, because it's not really necessarily across species, but like communicate with plants and communicate with spirits who've come before and all that kind of space. And as you talk about like the community engagement, I think a lot about in my work where we're doing work on behalf of Black and Brown kids, and their stories and the ways of going about collecting their stories don't jive with the very I was going to say, because it's like my everyday stuff, like don't jive with the white-centered ways of knowing and of
Mm-hmm.
being. And so our leadership will come out and be like, why are you even asking that question? Or what, like in the story on 74 and 75, they're like, Winnie's asking all about like, why are they called undying? And it seems like the kids would hurt themselves on these. And they're explaining that like, we respect them. They've got spirit. And like, you can connect to much more than just what you see as just quote unquote a tree kind of space. And that that space of seeing even symbols and experiences and beings as more than just the surface value of what they are, just kind of
Mm-hmm.
really spoke to me across that whole like different people's ways of knowing or different entities' ways of knowing, and how that if we could just tap into all of that being valid and potentially true all at the same time, there's just so much we could go forth solving rather than assuming we know the answers and like cut those trees down because kids won't get hurt kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. And I mean, I don't know. I think this might be not in contrast, but just sort of maybe complicating the ideas of different sources of knowledge, because I just see what happened with the Himba Council, and like by my interpretation, they were just wrong. They were so based in their understanding of what needed to be or what had to be that they, I mean, I'm jumping forward in the book a little bit, but they basically like abandoned Binti. They like, I think it was, I mean, at least once, maybe twice, they were supposed to show up to something that she'd organized, and they just like didn't show up.
Mm-hmm.
And they just sort of left her out to dry. And, you know, one of those times she got killed, which, I mean, you know, the spoiler is coming. But if you're watching this and you didn't know, we're about to spoil the end. Sorry. Um, but I was like just really mad at in my interpretation, what could be seen as traditional knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Though her friend, who was on the council, Dele, just like clearly, in my mind, like he was the one doing the right thing. He's like, hey, I see you. I'm breaking the rules, not telling them that I'm breaking the rules. But when it really comes down to it, like I will break all the rules because I believe in you. And I believe more in the goodness of our people or the capacity of our people than the rules we have set up previously. Which maybe isn't actually me saying I'm against the Himba Council. It's just like rigidity of rules out of right relationship with deeper understanding of identity or meaning. I don't know. I don't know where we are.
No, I totally hear that. I think it's like he saw that these rules had gone past the like kind of usefulness and were no longer like serving the original core like culture and being of the people. And so they had to go. Oh.
So cute. Oh my God.
Oh. Wait, so can we talk real quick about what it means that the night masquerade was basically just like the Himba Council and them, or like no, it wasn't Himba, it was like a additional like secret society that may have overlap with the Himba Council that like chose to show itself through the night masquerade at these like particular like pivotal moments in the like community's like trajectory. But they just show themselves in order to like basically like give confidence or support or like meaning to the experience that someone's about to have.
I don't know how I feel about that because I don't fully know if I've understood what was happening. Also, I'm pretty sure Bernadette's like changing a diaper, and it's my favorite thing. Love it. I haven't backtracked my thinking back to book 2 and 1 about the night masquerade. Like, who was the night masquerade in book 1? And
yeah,
did Binti like misinterpret those signals? Like, I don't think that makes sense. But they were like, the night masquerade doesn't appear to women or doesn't appear to girls. Like, not only was there a gender thing, but there was an age thing. But someone chose that. If it was the people, so like, why the?
Yeah, it's.
I don't know. I need to think about it more.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I also have a hard time unpacking what it means in the story for myself. Because I remember the like desert people. What they call themselves the Zenaria.
Yeah.
Of NZ Zenaria, they also recognize like the power of the night masquerade.
Yeah.
And like when Binti like revealed that she saw it, like they too were like, "Oh wow, you saw this experience," which I think, I don't know. To me, it's just like the night masquerade like somehow preceded this like rift between these two peoples. There's like some like, I don't know, deeper source within like connecting these two people represented by the night masquerade. Yeah, it's hard for me not to feel like night masquerade was just like, I don't know. To me, when I read it from like Binti's perspective, it feels like it was, I don't know, kind of like a trick that was played on her sometimes, like manipulative, and that kind of bothers me. It's like, Like, why would you do that to Binti?
Yeah, why would you do
There's many
that?
times where, yeah. But then there's also times where, like, the last moment she saw the Australia gave her like this huge boost of support in order to confront these massive two warring armies and just like walk in between them. Like, okay, so we're gonna figure this out. And, uh, and she did momentarily until
Yeah.
someone or something stood up.
Hi. Oh my gosh, that was yeah, I don't know. We need to think
Yeah.
more about that.
Yeah,
Bernadette,
we
are
don't know.
you with us? Do you have night masquerade thoughts? Oh wait, we
Oh, yeah.
can't I can't hear you even though it looks like you're not muted.
There we go.
Oh, here we go. Yep.
Double mute. Oh my goodness. So many thoughts, but I was. You saw me looking up at the moment, and you're like, oh, they were surprised that she could see it, and the whole like the choice that they made to like who could and who couldn't, and oh my goodness, like segueing into so many of the other conversations we've already been having tonight about perception and knowledge and who's perceived to be worthy of any particular kind of knowledge. And it just kind of triggers for me again this whole space of like, to your point, Lawrence, like with the council, I get totally where you're coming from of like, maybe not all knowledge is used well or good knowledge. And there's some way that I want to talk about that I'm not quite grasping at this moment, but like, particularly tonight masquerade, I was just like that space of like access to knowledge and like what happens when people who are deemed not worthy, not ready, not advanced enough to have a certain kind of knowledge get access to it, and like just the different ways they're able to use it. It's just, yeah. Not being very elegant right now in saying that it was a little bit mind-blowing for me with that same connection.
Mm. Yeah, I was pretty frustrated. But I think one last quick thought on that is I also felt like I did when I went to college and I learned about economics. And I was like, wait, this is how this works?
Yeah.
Like it's a setup?
I was like, you mean they just made it up?
There's no natural order to this?
The invisible hand is a myth. I was like, that's why they don't want people up in places.
Yeah, they're like, we're gonna change all that
Because they're like, oh right, if I knew the Night Masquerade was just a child in a suit, I would think very differently about the importance.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, can we talk about resurrection?
Yeah, let's talk about resurrection. So I know we talked briefly about this like in passing before, but I was totally ready when Binti was killed for that to be like, for there to be no miracle afterwards and like no happy ending, because I'm just so accustomed now to like Black Afrofuturist writing that just like allows tragedy to happen, and then you just have to like sit with that tragedy and like work with it and like work through it in a way that doesn't like feel good or feel great. But it's just very like, yeah, it's just very real. And so when I like learned that, like when I discovered Binti is still alive, when she discovered for herself she was still alive, I was like jumping up and down like, Binti, you're back. Yeah.
That's amazing. It's such a joyful image in my mind. Like
I might have literally been screaming like "Black Girl Magic!"
Oh.
Yeah, I definitely felt the Black Girl Magic vibes. And then I think I also screamed because she screamed. Or something like that. She was like, actually, my reaction really mirrored hers. She felt super weak at first. And I was like, what? And just confused. And then the scream came later. Like, what? Yeah. A quick thing on that, just I really appreciated, I think it's page 146, 147. The author, like, how she pivoted from Binti's perspective, and then when Binti died, to Winnie's perspective, and then there's like the last sentence on page 147 where she switches perspective again, and I was just like, that is so good.
Yeah, I think those are one of my favorite parts in the book. But like 10 pages where just like things just keep moving on, but you just immediately switch perspectives.
Yeah,
it's just so I don't think I've ever experienced that like in literature. I don't think.
I experienced it once in Octavia Butler's Mind of My Mind. And in that book, I think I was on the train or in a coffee shop. I like threw my book to the floor. I like couldn't deal with with the moment where it happened. Have either of you read that?
I haven't read it.
Okay, we can talk about what to
But
read next.
I'm down
later.
for those throw 'em down books. So.
Okay, other thoughts about resurrection? Like, we talked a little bit about the mechanics or about how we perceived it, but like narratively, what is happening?
Yeah. I can't actually remember what happened. So she resurrected because the like new fish was mother fish,
New fish, yeah.
new fish like saved like the genetic information of Binti. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm trying to look back at the
Yeah.
details. I was definitely reading really fast. So I saw it as like Binti fully died and then having her body, yeah, be in like, I don't know, I sort of interpreted it as like stem cells. Like new fish had stem cells that if Binti was put in contact with them, the life from new fish would reinvigorate Binti's body.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there is something interesting, whether or not that's exactly what happened, there's something interesting to me about the connection between old life and new life, or like old life and young life, like particularly having new fish be young.
But yeah, say more.
I mean, I guess I'm just thinking about in my life, babies, and like one of my friends, dear friend, who is a doula in many ways, but one of them being birth. She talks about watching parents be born as well as watching a new human come into life.
Hmm.
And it's like there are multiple births happening in those moments. And babies birth their parents.
Hmm.
And just like, even though the parents still exist in their same bodies, they go through a major change in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so just like the connection between what happens when new life comes and its relationship to life that's already existing. It's not always destructive or bad, and maybe it's always like this happens. It's like there is some sort of resurrection, whether it's like, I mean, like, you know, in lots of like indigenous African traditions, like the spirit world and the material world are like just two sides of reality. And like when you're asleep in the spirit world, you're alive in material world or earth world. And then when you die in earth world, you wake up in spirit world. Anyway, so there's just like the closeness of like life and death and young and old and new and existing. It's just like, I don't know, I'm thinking a lot about that these days.
I like that, especially in the closeness. When you did this little thing, like we talk a lot about spectrum in my work and just in my life, and how often we think of like young and old as opposite, yes ma'am, ends of spectrum, but they're actually more circular, and they're like, those ends are like right next to each other and so much easier to cross back and forth between, so they're not as far disconnected as we might be like, oh, you've got a journey to get to that place, or you've gone a long journey to get away from a place, but it's really just 1 foot away. And especially in that reincarnation space, like to your point about African religions, like not even just like when you die, you're able to kind of cross over into that spirit world, but like actively being connected to that world on a more active, engaged space, rather than one day when I die, decades from now, I'll get there kind of thing. Which is why I love the birthing of parents kind of concept. And for me, again, kind of, maybe this is more Black thing than not, but like I always grew up with my grandparents. My daughter grew up with her grandparents. So particularly that connection of like birthing grandparents, and how connected those two were kind of spiritually in ways that I can't really speak to, also really kind of triggers for me in the whole space of like, you're alive, but then you're not, but you never really weren't alive, and you never really weren't dead. So, yeah.
Whoa. Oh my God. My eyes just watered up. I think I might cry. I don't even know why. I mean, emotions or why, but like, woof. You never really weren't dead.
I just love the like mental image of spectrum being like more of a circle. It just feels so much more right. And I think like, yeah, it's like the experience of like just like Binti, like her intergenerational experience, because she has so many of them.
Yeah.
it's hard to like connect them all, but it's like all of our lines of identity have like aspects of like intergenerationalness to them that are like so important. And like the latest one is just like Binti, like the new ship, she had all these terrible traumatic experiences of like uh, death and like I don't know, like violence, and then the like offspring of new ship becomes like this life generating source for Binti. And so like to me that like image of like spectrum as like circular like helps much better helps describe that like experience rather than spectrum as these things are just like so far apart from each other that one end cannot possibly speak to the other.
I mean, I think of it, I'm very much a gardener, which is why this snowstorm is killing me because there are all sorts of buds and blooms that were coming up, but also in the gardening space, that's life, right? Like things that die give way to things that live. And without the death that came before, the land is not fertile enough for anything new to come forth. And I've lived here in this particular house 10 years. And when we first moved in, it was like rocks and rubble. And now we have this amazing garden that people are like, how did you even grow that? And I'm like, you had to have a lot of things die before these things could grow forth. And so, yes, originally I was like, oh, the snowstorms are going to kill everything off. But every year we get a late frost. We have an amazing garden afterward. And I often look out on it and I see the absence or the lack. So we have lots of flowers and blooms most years, but during late frost years, those buds die and the blooms come late. But I'll say, it's so green, there's no color in my garden. But then when I take the time to just get like up close and take little snippets of it, then I see one, the diversity of the green, but then also that there are quite a few blooms out in the garden that survive even the harshest conditions. So that whole space of like death being, or even endings being like this traumatic, everything is bad and nothing good can come of it space is something that across the three books, I think, especially coming to your point, Reed, about like having a traumatic experience and then having the offspring of that same ship be able to be like so life-giving is if we step back far enough in our life experiences and journeys, and some people have to step much farther back than that. I think that truth bears out time and time again.
Mm. Mm. There are so many other things to talk about, and we don't have to end now, but Bernadette, I definitely feel like you started us on the, oh my God, so magical. Just want to talk.
She's been out of school for a while, and she's quite the school kid, so she's like, somebody help me.
I need
What?
school.
Why the mean thing?
I'm like, I gotta go and work over there.
Okay, go work over there.
Wow.
Oh.
So good. Okay, well, I definitely want to talk about what book we're going to read next.
Yes.
If y'all are still down. And maybe, yeah, like lessons from across the three books. Bernadette sort of started, but if that's not a lesson you want to land with, you could definitely come back to another one. But that, I just appreciated that framing, and so I think I'll riff on it at least for myself. And my lesson, which is a lesson that I've been learning, definitely learned it in almost all of Octavia Butler's books, but notably Kindred and the Pattern Master series and the Xenogenesis trilogy, that how capable one is of evolving is like directly connected to your relationship and reaction to difference. And Reed, I think you were mentioning before, like at one point, Binti just sort of walks in between these two warring nations. She's like, I got this. I can hold in my body the difference that is here. And even though she's not Kush, she was like, I still can do this.
Mm-hmm.
I am Meduse, I'm Himba, I am Inyi and Zenariah. She's like, I can handle difference, and I will handle it to the point of ending wars, or at least attempting to end wars.
Mm-hmm.
And even though she died, she got resurrected. Not that that's what will happen always, but I really do believe in that approach to difference, and also knowing that sometimes those approaches hurt, but the end goal is where I want to go.
Mm.
So that's my sort of takeaway.
I love that. I'm going to take that away also for myself now. I think my takeaway is it's really about the experience of learning more about where you're from and having that be difficult and challenging, yet having it also be an opportunity just to like deepen your own understanding of yourself and your people and your background in a way that like acknowledges that like there might be, the more you learn about like, you know, family intergenerational history, you might learn things that you don't like, but there's still like plenty of like just like nourishment and like amazing things to like come out of those learnings. And I think, yeah, I think I really got that from like Binti's experience and just how like learning about who you are, and it's not like a linear process. It's like very like circles within circles and circles. I think that's also was really helpful for me this particular moment in my life.
Yeah, I probably pretty much still stand by that first one of like being able to step back from the trauma to see how it seeds and make space for really amazing. I was going to say good, but good is not necessarily the opposite of trauma, because it can also still be, to your point, Lawrence, difficult and hard, and put yourself out there and you can get killed and not reincarnated, right? But I think that unending theme of like being able to be open to learning more about yourself, to being open to difference is often not a cakewalk, because it involves giving up some of our own privileges and ways of being. Sorry, this one is, I guess, getting ready to paint.
Oh,
I don't know what she's doing. But giving up the comforts of home and what you think you know to go out and in her case, it wasn't really about bettering herself so much as bettering the broader society. So like that space of being that open to not necessarily sacrifice, because I don't think she ever, I don't know ever, but like I don't think it was this self-sacrificial kind of thing. It was definitely this space of like, I'm capable, I feel a bit chosen, so I should go kind of thing. Why give up an opportunity? But it's not being afraid of not knowing and so not taking advantage of opportunities because you don't know exactly how they're going to work out. That throughout the 3 books, and again getting to that space that like things often, or at least sometimes, don't work out, and being okay with like that's the seed for the next thing that's going to work out for the next person, so that you clear the path so that people don't have to start from the same space that you're like, why are we still struggling with this? That space, particularly in this part of my life where I'm just like, impatient and ready for things to be significantly different and better than they are, and often questioning this space of like, well, what's the point in doing X if we're not going to get all the way there? I mean, the point is that the next person, the next society, the next people, the next whatever will have it that much more advanced to start from, as opposed to starting from my questions right now. So that space of her continuously being put in and selecting to be in spaces that she didn't have to, that were in service of a bigger thing than herself.
Amen.
Yeah.
Woo! Team.
Yeah, I love reading this to y'all. It was great.
So great. I just want to pull all three of these books up here.
Your stack.
I'm going to y'all should read these.
I already have a line of people I know waiting to get these.
Really?
Yeah. That's a line.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I have 2 people who are trying to get these.
Yeah.
Brenda, is your oldest child old enough to read yet?
She is 3, and she thinks she reads, but we read.
I'm 3.
How old are you? She said, "No, I'm 3. I said you were 3. I didn't say you were 2. I've been saying she's 2 for the longest, but I don't think she can read yet. But she'd be surprising me with some stuff. So,
Look at my mouth.
but yeah, we actually. I'm not that parent that's like, this is too advanced for my kids kind of thing. And so, because my grandmother wasn't that way with me. I mean, they took me to go see Silence of the Lambs when I was like 8 or 9 in the theater. So, but so like, we actually do read bigger books together. And when she saw these, she was like, I want to read those. And so we probably will be reading the Binti series together.
Yes.
After we Wildwood.
Awesome.
Okay, well, what should we read next?
Ooh. Do suggestions?
I mean, so I'm already reading this, doing a little cheating on our group. So, and by no means am I arguing for this book over other books. It is really good.
What is it? I can't really see.
It's the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, and she is being celebrated as one of the current world's best world builders, and people are continually expanding her domain back through history. Like maybe she's one of the best world builders ever. So that's one. But a friend of mine was reading Of Blood and Bone.
Of Blood.
Have
Oh,
you read that, Bernadette?
wait. I read that like a couple weeks ago.
You just finished it?
It's not good. It's not
Where
good.
did y'all have time?
We don't have kids. That's why.
Oh my God. Take these kids. I want to read again.
Bring them to me. I'll take them.
You can have them. Come Thursday, come get them. Were you saying, Reed, you already read it and it wasn't good?
If this is what I think it was, that's the second book in a series. A series of the One, like it's called the Chronicles of the One or something.
That sounds right.
Nora Roberts.
Oh wait, no, that doesn't sound right.
Because Nora Roberts is definitely not an Afrofuturist.
No. Children of Blood and Bone.
Okay. I was like,
no. Ain't nobody got time for Nora Roberts.
Okay. I did understand that.
No.
So I'll put this out there. I have read the N.K. Jemisin series. I would love
Really?
to read it again for a group. It is like, I think it's one of the best series I've ever read. And I read it over a period of like 4 years, like as she was releasing them. So I would love to go back to read them and like talk about them.
Sounds like there's some things being played or
Um,
happening over there. So Bernadette definitely.
Sorry, what was the name of it again?
Oh, we're just still talking about the 5th season. Reed said he'd love to reread it. It's a bit thick, but it's a super fast read. Like, it's a lot of dialogue. It moves pretty quickly. But I definitely am down to hear other ideas. It's just the idea that I have.
My toddler's a mess. That's why you see me in the dark and then in the light. Julia, stop it.
Adorable.
Y'all, I'm down to read whatever. So you two decide.
Okay.
And then shoot me an email with what we decide, and I'll get it at my library. Because you haven't steered me wrong yet. I've thoroughly enjoyed reading everything we've read.
Cool.
Great. Well, we'll let you know.
Cool.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Reed. Bye, Lauren.
Good night.
Good night. Julia, say good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Oh my gosh, so adorable. Okay, I think I'm just gonna stop recording now.